Hello, my name's Mr. Bates, and today we're going to be looking at a revision activity. This is one of the booster activities. It's called Stop and Explain. So booster activities are designed really for you to use with any other activities. So let's have a look at what Stop and Explain is. Like I said, you can be using it with any other activity. So when you're doing that activity, after a certain amount of time, I'll be asking you to stop what you're doing and then explain that concept, that thing that you was just learning. Okay, that's Stop and Explain. So why would we do Stop and Explain? I am suggesting this is probably one of the most important techniques, habits that you can get into to help your learning. I'm going to tell you several reasons why. For starters, it's great at just checking your understanding of the thing that you just learned. Okay, so you can explain to yourself. Can you explain to yourself? If you can, fantastic. You know, you've understood that and you can move on. The second thing is that by doing this regular stop and check idea, what you're doing also is just making sure that you're not getting stuck into just doing what we call passive learning, you know, where you're getting a bit distracted, not totally focused learning. So it's a good check for that. Another really good thing about this activity is not just checking. Right, it is actually learning and good learning as well. If you can stop and explain to yourself what that concept was, then you are formulating your ideas, you're making it much more understandable to yourself whilst you're doing that explanation. So that's another really good reason to do the stop and explain. And lastly, by stopping and checking, if it's working, what you're also doing, you're not just checking your understanding, but you're also checking those activities that you're doing to try and understand, are they working? Okay, if you keep doing this stop and check, you'll soon find out which activities work for you and which activities don't. Let's have a little look at some details of this. So what you would do is revise as usual. Maybe after 10 minutes or so, that's when you would stop and explain. So you might be watching a video to learn, and after 10 minutes of watching the video, you remember, okay, I've got to stop now. You'd stop the video and try to explain to yourself, do I understand that thing that was just being shown on that video or not? You might have been making notes instead. And if you're making those notes, that's great. But remember, after about 10 minutes, stop yourself and check, am I actually concentrating? Can I explain what I've just written about? That's what we're doing with a stop and explain. And another activity here that you might be doing after about 10 minutes, you would stop and check again. Okay, so can you explain that information? Has it gone into your head well enough so that you understand it? All right, so what would make a good explain activity that you're doing then? Yeah, it's all well and good stopping and checking, but there's certain things that you should do and shouldn't do. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to check to see if you've understood that thing that you've been learning about. We're trying to make sure we're keeping it more active rather than passive learning. And we're also rethinking that whole topic, which is really useful. And lastly, as a sort of side product, that all that information will then tell you if the revision that you're doing is good revision. So there's two main things that I would suggest you do. And the first one is no looking. Don't look back at the stuff that you've just been revising. It's got to come from your head without any other clues. Okay, because otherwise you're not really checking that you understand. You're going back and rereading it, okay, or re-looking at it. And that doesn't tell you whether you've understood that thing. All right. Also, if you're going back and looking at it, you're not really rethinking about it. You're not really thinking about it in a different way. So when you're explaining, you're having to join things together, trying to make sense of the whole thing. And that's really good for you. So no looking, first rule. The second rule is instead of just saying it out loud or thinking about it in your head, my advice is always write your explanation on paper, draw it, write it. Think about it as if you are going to use that bit of paper to explain that thing to somebody else. That gives you much more structured answers rather than the vague ones that we have if we just think about an idea and we think, oh, yeah, I think I get that. So that is the sum total of stop and explain. So it's a nice, easy concept. Like I said right at the start, I think that this is one of the best activities that you can do as part of your revision routine. And the reason for that is it's quick, It's easy and it can be done with everything else. And it gives you lots of really good, valuable information about what you understand and what revision techniques are working for you. I'm sure it won't take long before you get really good at that and you see how useful it is. Thanks for listening.